Colin Foreman, and I'm the editor of MEED, and it's my pleasure to be here this morning to present on the transport sector in the GCC. The aim of the presentation today is give you an overview of a sector which is very busy at the moment and covers several key subsectors. I will then be quite keen to take any questions, so we'll have a Q&A session towards the end. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the question section on the browser, and I'll look to try and start answering questions maybe after about 40 minutes. But if there's a lot of questions coming through, I can maybe pick off a few as we go through. And also, to keep it a little bit interactive during my presentation, there's a few poll questions as well. So it'd be great to hear what people are thinking about some of the issues in the market at the moment. So with that, I will get started. First slide. Okay, before we start, we have the MENA Transport Projects Market Report for 2026, which is now on sale. There's a code there for you if you want to take the code and scan the QR code with your phones. And the code is webinar 600 for a $600 discount. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, that's a promotion there for you. Now, to start on with the presentation, I think it's important just to take a little bit of a step back and think about what the region's really trying to do and what type of projects that we're going to be talking about. And really, if you think about it, there's three key areas that we're talking about before we start talking about modes of transport and specific projects. So the first one are the global drivers. Most of you will be fully aware that the GCC sits between a number of big continents where there's a lot of trade and passenger travel. So that's important from an aviation point of view. So over the last few decades, we've seen the emergence of these hub airports in the region, most notably Dubai, but also in Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and elsewhere, where a lot of connecting traffic is going through the region, whether it be from Africa to Asia, Australia to Europe, and so on and so forth. So that's something that's become really quite an important part of the GCC transport story. On the shipping side, I think the important thing to remember is there's an awful lot of shipping goes past the region through the Suez Canal. So that's an important trade route. And then on top of that, there's a lot of trade within the region, which comes from global markets that's coming into the major ports in the region as well. So on the global side, there's global infrastructure which has been developed and is being developed. Then if we sort of look a notch down, we've got what I call regional connections. And this is quite an interesting space, and one which I think is changing quite a lot in the last few years. If we think about it, the connections between the cities of the region over the last 50 years have really been quite limited. There's been a road network, which in many cases has been very basic, and most of the travel between the cities of the region is done by air. Myself, and I'm sure most of you that are based in the region, if you're traveling from the region's capitals, the normal way of doing that would be by flying, and there's a lot of aviation traffic as a result of that doing that. There's various statistics that come around, but some of the air routes, most notably the Dubai to Riyadh route and the Riyadh-Jeddah route, are amongst the most lucrative air routes in the world for that reason, because there's no real alternative to traveling by air, and there's a lot of business and travel that happens between those cities. So regional wise, it's been very much an air story with a little bit of road, which is obviously more popular for freight than passengers. And that's starting to change. There's been a lot of talk in the last 5 years, particularly about the GCC rail network, which is a longer standing project, but the last 5 years rail has really come to the fore a lot more. And also some of the roads are being developed a lot more as well. So I think the The position of just using air is something which is starting to change, but it's not going to go away that quickly. So that's on the sort of the regional side, and also I think the other thing to add on the regional side is sort of regional travel within countries themselves. I think the Saudi Arabia in particular is developing rail networks across Saudi Arabia. The UAE has a similar program with Etihad Rail. So there's connections within some of the larger geographies of the region. And then the final one, which is probably one that anyone that's based in the region confronts at least once a day, is local congestion. So that's very much the traffic and that you experience on the roads in the mornings and the evenings, and probably other times of the day as well. That again has been very much a road story in terms of urban transport over the last 50 years. Really, the only the first metro to be delivered was Dubai Metro, which opened on the 9th of September 2009. We've had other networks open more recently. Doha opened in 2019 and Riyadh just in December last year. So that is a changing story. I think there are still some challenges there with urban mobility, particularly when using public transport with regard to the last mile, but it's something that the cities of the region are really trying to change. And if you look at the performance, certainly of Dubai Metro and Riyadh Metro, the ridership has been quite strong, and at times the network is struggling to cope with the amount of traffic. So the case for using public transport has been proven. How successful it is for the future and for other lines, I think, depends on a holistic approach and making sure some of those last mile challenges are dealt with effectively. I think that's particularly important in the region during the summer months when the climate means it's very difficult to walk places as it might be compared to cities in Europe, for example. So they're the three I guess layers to the transport story in the region, and I think they're important just to remember as before we start diving down into different modes of transport and specific projects. What do the countries of the region do as far as transport's concerned? Most countries have something which is equates to a transport study. I've just put this one up as an example. So in Saudi Arabia, there's the National Industrial Development and Logistics Program. These are generally high-level strategy documents that have ambitions and goals set for the transport sector. Normally have things involving creating hubs, improving connectivity. There's increasingly a flavor of technology coming in there with things like automation and streamlining the logistics process. So that's something really that's quite high up on the agenda of governments in the region, and something which is driving the projects and the investment into infrastructure that we've seen over recent years. In terms of what are the most popular or the most focused on projects in the region, it's quite interesting when you look at all the active projects that are in the region and just see which ones are getting the most attention. You can see from there that railway has an awful lot of investment set aside for it. That's something that's really taken on a new lease of life since January 2021. For those of you that remember, there was the GCC diplomatic dispute came to an end in 2021. And with that Alula declaration that was signed then, one of the key clauses in there was about the GCC committing to the railway project and tying the region closer together with a rail network. Since then, we've seen a lot of push on terms of railway projects and railway projects being announced. It's across a number of levels. We've got metro and urban rail solutions for quite a lot of the cities on the drawing board now. But also we've got sort of railway networks within countries, and also rail networks or rail lines connecting different countries that are planned. And quite a few of these are high speed as well. So the ticket size of those projects is really quite substantial. So railway is far away in the lead at the moment, followed by airports. Airports, as I said, is something that the region's been quite keen on, and it's been an important form of travel, traveling, getting around the region, but also as a global hub. There's notable airports and very large airports in the region, and two of the world's largest airport projects now are in the region, with Al Maktoum International Airport in Dubai and King Salman International Airport in Riyadh. So not a surprise to see airport figuring so highly there. Other things there, I think that the two ones to really mention are roads. Roads, there's still an awful lot of road building going on. As much as we'd like to see the end of traffic on the roads and maybe alternatives to road car transport, it's still something which is going to remain for the foreseeable future, and governments are responding to traffic normally as the first option is to deliver more roads. So that's adding more roads to the city network. So there's a lot of spending there. That tends to be, unlike airports and railways, which is several key big projects, roads tends to be more fragmented and an aggregation of a lot of smaller projects. But still, once you add it all up, is a large amount of investment. The other one there, just to note before we move on, is ports. There's a lot of investment that goes into ports, and most recently, quite a few major projects in Saudi Arabia. So ports is another place where there's a lot of investment going on. I think one thing that's important to just consider when we look at these things, and I'm sure many of you that are there trying to plan and strategize what you do in terms of what type of opportunities you go after, is just to ask yourself, how likely are these projects to go ahead? There's a lot of projects that get announced, talked about, and don't really move ahead. I've tried to come up with something that can, say, quantify or give some indicator of how likely these things are to proceed. And it's quite interesting if you take the value of railway projects that are being completed and then compare it to the value of railway projects that have been put on hold or cancelled in the past, you'll find that the numbers are not so favourable. So in fact, there's more rail projects that stall than actually move ahead, which is very different when you compare it to, say, airports, where it's roughly double the amount of airport projects are completed to those that have been put on hold. So air is something which seems to go ahead, more likely to go ahead than rail. At the same time, road is likely to go ahead, which the number of road projects completed is more than double the number of road projects that stall. Ports are more favourable than rail, but not as strong as air and road. So that gives you an idea, perhaps on a historical basis, but it gives you an idea of where the priorities have been in the past, and certainly that has been air and road, and perhaps that will change in the future with the recent focus on rail projects. If we look at transport awards over time, we can see that there's peaks and troughs. These generally follow the broader project market. I think if we think back to the times when there's high numbers, it's been at a time when there's been supportive oil prices and a lot of activity elsewhere in the region. I think that's a logical thing to see what's come through. I think that's because a lot of transport is supporting other development ideas and other development drives within the region, and also serving sort of global economy objectives. If the global economy is quite buoyant, then the case for some of the transport schemes increases also. In terms of the absolute peak, that was in 2013, and possibly my busiest day or most exciting day for a contract award in my time at MEED was in 2013 when the contracts for Riyadh Metro were signed, and there was 23 billion signed in one day, and I haven't had a day where I've reported on a higher value of contracts signed in one day. So that really was a peak. However, if we look at the total that was achieved last year, it was not far off the total from 2013, and it was without a $23 billion scheme being signed off in one day. So I think that shows that 2024 was a very busy year, and if it wasn't for 2013, would have been the busiest year on record. Likewise, 2023 was also a busy year, and 2022 was quite a strong year. So I think if you take those 3 years together and think about work that's going on site at the moment, we've got a very busy period at the moment for executing transport projects. The year-to-date number for 2025 is not quite as good as one might have hoped if you were looking to exceed the 2024 total. That could change if there's some large ticket items awarded by the end of the year, but our expectation is it will fall short of the 2024 total. However, still probably being above the historical norm, certainly for the last 10 years, but probably also for the last 5 years. If we take a look at where those contract awards are going, I've done 2 pie charts there just to give a little bit of a flavour, and we can see that for over the last 5 years, it's been really quite dominated by Saudi Arabia. Obviously, there's a massive drive to enhancing Saudi Arabia's infrastructure with Vision 2030, giga projects, etc., moving ahead. And so over the last 5 years, over half of the contract awards have been in Saudi Arabia, and roughly a quarter has been in the UAE, and the remaining quarter split amongst the other 4 countries. That split has changed a little bit this year, and we see that the UAE has become more prominent and Saudi Arabia has become less prominent. This is partly due to activity increasing in the UAE, but also due to a slight slowdown in the sort of velocity of contract awards in Saudi Arabia over the last 18 months or so. So that has shifted, but I think it's pretty clear from those 2 pie charts that no matter what the time period, the UAE and Saudi Arabia are the most active markets in the transport sector for contract awards. Now it's time for our first poll question. In terms of the subsectors, which subsector do you see the most opportunities coming through? Would that be in airports, ports, railways, or roads? Just wait a little bit for the numbers to come through. But at the moment, it's very strongly looking like railways, which is very interesting given the change in how rail has been viewed over the last few years. I think if we were doing this poll perhaps 6, 7 years ago, railways would have fallen way behind perhaps airports and possibly even roads as well, whereas now we're looking at 63% of people think that railways, and the next highest is airports with 22%. So that really shows quite strongly that railways have a lot of expectation now, which is very different to what would have been the case in the past, I think. One other thing just to highlight, and thank you for your poll question answers, but also in terms of being interactive, we do have a WhatsApp channel which you can join if you scan the QR code. This is a way to get updates from MEED and global data on news and developments across the project sector, just sent directly through to your phone, which is a great way to stay on top of what's happening in the market. Okay, I'll now talk about railways a little bit, and I'm glad that I've put that subsector first, as it does reflect 63% of you in terms of expectations for opportunities. Just a little bit of history. The operational railways in the region, we've got Dubai Metro, which opened in 2009. There is a railway in Saudi Arabia that was operating since the 1950s, I believe. And then in 2011, there was the North-South Rail, 2018, the Haramain High Speed, which is important for two things. One, it's a major project in its own right, but secondly, it's high speed, and we've seen a lot of high speed being talked about to solve some of those sort of city-to-city connections. Doha Metro opened in 2019, which was part of Doha's infrastructure commitment for the World Cup that was held in 2022. 2023, the freight rail opened in Etihad Rail, which added to an earlier phase of Etihad Rail, which transported sulfur from inland Abu Dhabi to the coast, which I think from memory opened earlier in the 2010s. I can't remember the exact date that it was inaugurated. And then in 2024, arguably the big one, Riyadh Metro was opened in November last year and is now operating and being used and very busy. In terms of rail contracts, as I mentioned, Riyadh Metro was a peak moment in 2013, but you can see there how important those big schemes are once they get awarded. They really shift the numbers, obviously big ticket items, and make a large difference. The other interesting ones, if you look at some of the 2013, 14, 15, 16 numbers, there was things like packages on Doha Metro being awarded, and the Red Line extension or Route 2020 that was in Dubai as well. So lots of big schemes there, and when they come along, they shift the needle quite significantly. And the big one last year was the Blue Line Award for Dubai Metro. In terms of the pipeline for projects going forward, Saudi Arabia is the largest, followed by the UAE, followed by Qatar, then Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. So again, based on history, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been the most active markets, followed by Kuwait, and it looks like that trajectory is expected to continue, given the project plans in all the different geographies. Just to talk through some of the recent developments in rail, particularly in Saudi Arabia. The one that we reported on in July was the Line 2 extension, which is adding to an existing Line 2, but connecting it largely to the Diriyah development, which is a giga project to the west of Riyadh. So that's an important strategic project with an awful lot of assets being built and delivered there, and at the moment isn't served by the existing metro network. So this is obviously to remedy that fact, and it was awarded to one of the consortiums that worked on the original 6 lines of the metro, which includes WeBuild from Italy, India's Larsen & Toubro, and local contractor Nesma and Partners, along with rolling stock providers as well. I think the thing that's quite important to note on this when it comes to contractor involvement in rail, it is one of the sectors which manages to attract and get participation from international players. We've seen a lot of local capability being developed in recent years for a lot of the real estate and building projects that go ahead, and there's certainly a question that international contractors don't really have a market in a lot of building work now in the region. However, rail is one area where an international contractor can come in and really add value and bid successfully and win work. Another project announcement from this year in Saudi Arabia is the Qiddiya high-speed rail, which again is a rail line which is being developed to serve a giga project, which is the Qiddiya Entertainment City. That will run from the King Salman International Airport, which is the expansion of King Khalid International Airport to the north of Riyadh, runs through KAFD and then on to Qiddiya. The interesting thing on this is it's been pushed forward as a public-private partnership. This is something which is certainly flavour of the day in terms of conversations when it comes to delivering projects across a number of sectors, including transport. And it's a very interesting project to watch, because I think if this PPP solution can be delivered successfully, it will be a successful pioneer project that other projects can follow in the future. And in the past, we've talked about PPP projects in the region for rail, most recently the Bahrain Metro Network, and also in Oman there was talk of PPP being used for some elements of rail projects there serving mining operations. So I think if this project can get it right and PPP can deliver, then I think we'll see it elsewhere. But it's certainly a good test case to watch for the sector going forwards. Another one, again, a story from this year, is the revival of Mecca Metro. This is something we reported on a lot around 2013, 2014, and is now certainly back on the agenda in terms of moving into an active construction project. So there's meetings being held there, and that project is gearing up to proceed again now. So that's another reflection of how transportation, and rail in particular, is now a key priority for many places across the region. Again, in Saudi Arabia, we've got Riyadh Metro Line 7, which is another major rail project. That's currently in the tender stage at the moment. And again, another major piece of civil engineering which has attracted a lot of interest from international and local players. One project which has been talked about for many years and has been proceeding, however, hasn't resulted in work starting on site, is the Saudi Land Bridge. This is a scheme which will basically connect the Red Sea coast on the west to the Gulf Coast on the east, running through Riyadh. There's been a consortium lined up to take over the work, which is a Saudi-Chinese consortium. It's unclear whether the project will proceed with them. There's a lot of talk about when the project will move ahead. It seems to be about to be ready to move ahead, but then doesn't move actually into work on site. The other important component of this is a connection across Riyadh, so basically connecting the lines that run from Riyadh to the east and Riyadh to the west, which is another major project in its own right. But that's a very ambitious scheme, the Saudi Land Bridge, which has been talked about for a number of years, and it has been a little bit slow, I think, to move into a contract award and actual construction. UAE, there's also significant amounts of work that's going on in the UAE. The UAE, I think I mentioned that rail's taken a lot of impetus from the Al Ula agreement in 2021. The UAE was a bit ahead of the curve there in 2018. There was a strong push to get Etihad Rail moving, the second and third phases, and since then the UAE's been very much a regional leader when it comes to rail. There's a lot of things happening in rail at the moment. There's the high-speed rail. The first connection will be Abu Dhabi to Dubai. That's at tender at the moment, and there's two main civil engineering packages, one in Abu Dhabi and one in Dubai. Another recently announced project is the Abu Dhabi tram, which will connect the airport with Yas Island, Raha Beach, and Khalifa City. And as I'm sure many of you will be aware, there's major developments on Yas Island, including the Disney resort. In Dubai, as I mentioned, the Blue Line was awarded at the back end of last year. More recently, there's been a consultant selected for the metro, what they call Metro Line 4 or the Gold Line. So that's another metro line that will help alleviate congestion. And there's also been consultants bidding for a rail master plan in Dubai, which will just look at the whole rail network, but also look at adding a station to the existing red line. Elsewhere in the region, there's quite a few other projects. Perhaps the most notable out of all of them is Hafid Rail, which is the rail connection between Oman and the UAE. Construction contracts were ordered in 2024, and work on that project is ongoing. So that's a live project that's moving ahead. The others are more on the sort of the planning and study stage. There's Muscat Metro, where a study started last year. That in itself is quite an extensive network with a fairly hefty price tag. And there is the Qatar-Saudi rail link and the Kuwait National Railroad, and connecting Kuwait up to Saudi Arabia by rail. So there's quite a bit happening there on both of them. Kuwait's been appointed a consultant, and there's been some political moves in Qatar just to pave the way for the rail link to Saudi, which the Qatar to Saudi rail link was in the process of appointing contractors back in 2015, 2016 sort of time. I think it was I think they had issued a tender, but then the project stalled. So it'll be good to see that scheme moving ahead once again. So quite a lot of variety there on the rail side. We just have a question about rail, which is an interesting topic to discuss, and I could probably spend another couple of webinars talking about rail in the different countries. But in terms of what's the biggest challenge for delivering the GCC rail, do we see it as political coordination, funding, contractor capacity, or is it technical engineering challenges? What do people feel there? Okay, it looks like we've got the responses now. Interesting answers. Political coordination seems to be the pick, with about 44% of the responses, followed by funding, which is at 35%. So these are really front end hurdles that we're talking about, whereas the other two are slightly further down the process. So that would suggest that if there is a problem for the GCC project going ahead, it's going to happen before it moves into the construction and delivery phase. It's very much a front end challenge rather than a later on in the delivery process. We now move on to airports. Airports, like I said, has been a really important driver for project spending over the last 20 years, with major developments in Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain, Muscat, and Saudi Arabia being delivered. And we can see there it's been a strong source of contract awards. And as I mentioned earlier, the region is now home to two of the world's largest airport projects in Riyadh and Dubai. In terms of the status of projects, there's quite a lot of work that's under construction at the moment, but there's a lot more to come, certainly, as those major projects start gearing up. Just to give a little bit of a visual context for the airport in Dubai and in Riyadh. The airport at the top is Al Maktoum International Airport in Dubai. That's got a number of key assets which are probably worth pointing out. That there's the runways and general infrastructure, then there's the terminal building, and then a series of major concourses. In terms of what its ultimate objectives are, it's looking to have a handling capacity eventually of about 260 million passengers a year. If we contrast that with Dubai at the moment, can handle up to about 100 million passengers a year, which makes it the busiest international airport in the world. And this project is really Dubai staking its claim to remain as a major global aviation hub. The picture below is King Salman International Airport. on the face of it, similar objectives. It's aiming for 185 million by 2050. Not quite as high as Dubai, but still a substantial undertaking. This is quite an interesting project in terms of the layout. The objective here is to build a very busy airport, but also create an airport destination. So if you look at the configuration of the contact gates, they're all going around this large scale rectangular development in the middle of the airport. So it's really rethinking the way airports operate. There's quite a lot of discussion now that I've had with people in the airport business about whether that's a good way to go. There's a lot of people that aren't really sure about how that model will work. But I think what it really hinges on is how successful the development inside the airport takes hold. If that becomes a very popular shopping destination or F&B venue, then it really will change the perception of how airports operate. One thing that was told to me was that you'll start going to the airport in Riyadh not just to fly; it will be somewhere that you go just as a place to go. So that's a very different proposition to a traditional airport, which you really only ever go to when you're flying somewhere. In terms of what the latest airport developments are, we've got the projects in construction still. So there's a second terminal in Kuwait that's being built. There's bits of work ongoing at Riyadh's King Khalid International Airport, which will ultimately become King Salman International Airport in terms of terminal work and runway. And also there's investment plans by the existing operators at MENA Airport, and that includes building a domestic terminal. Tendering, this is probably the most interesting thing for a lot of people at the moment, is ongoing tendering for King Salman International Airport. There's terminals being bid, which are the two terminals that are planned there are Terminal 6 and the Iconic Terminal. And there's also been bidding activity and awards for runways. Al Maktoum International Airport tendering is also ongoing for a people mover, which is quite an extensive rail system which will serve the airport. And there's also tendering going on for the substructure for the concourses and terminal. And teams are competing for the Abha Airport in Saudi Arabia, which, as I mentioned, is another PPP transport project, which is moving ahead. Unlike rail, where there isn't really a precedent in the region, there is a PPP project at Medina, which has been delivered. So there is some case to follow in terms of how to deliver an airport PPP in Saudi Arabia. So that's another interesting project. Things that are a little bit further down the line, Abu Dhabi's got some plans to expand Zayed International Airport. In addition to the midfield terminal being expanded a little bit, there is a satellite terminal which is also being considered. And then other projects include things like Taif Airport in Saudi Arabia and a major expansion at Jeddah Airport, which is certainly being talked about. We've been talking to various stakeholders about that project for over a year now. And I think some of the questions that are being talked about is how the project will be funded. If we now move on to ports. Ports are a mix of things, really. There's the large scale international sort of facing ports, which are the main hubs. So traditionally we've had Jebel Ali, and then more recently ports in Abu Dhabi and to a lesser extent in Qatar, but also in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, and also on the East Coast. A lot of projects are currently being delivered in Saudi Arabia. And on top of that, you have smaller regional ports, which are being developed on a sort of an ongoing basis. These tend to be smaller schemes and include port or facilities in some of the secondary cities around the region. In terms of latest updates on the port front, there's quite a few things in construction in Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, including the expansion to Jeddah Islamic Port. Perhaps the most interesting one is Oxagon Port at NEOM, which has several major packages have been awarded there and are being delivered. That port will basically be the industrial hub for activity at NEOM. So it's a major undertaking which will support construction efforts for the broader NEOM development. There's upgrades to container terminals at King Abdulaziz Port in Dammam. And then another major project is the shipyards at King Salman International Maritime City in Ras Al Khair. Tendering, the probably largest scheme of note is the latest phases of Barak Al Kabir Port in Kuwait. This has got quite a heavy Chinese involvement, with contractors talking with the authorities on a sort of an early contractor basis, and also possibly on an investment basis for that project. So a couple of interesting things there on the tendering phase. And then in terms of future projects, I think most of the major ports do have some form of expansion that's being considered. There's lots of sort of plans on the drawing board in terms of how to increase capacity, whether it's increasing capacity of existing services, whether it be container or general cargo, but also adding in new types of services. And another interesting feature that I think is going to become more important, and this applies to all modes of transport, but it's probably most pertinent to port, is the connection with other modes of transport. We've seen that Khalifa Port in Abu Dhabi is now fully connected to the Etihad rail system, as will be Jebel Ali Port in Dubai. And I think this is a trend that we're going to see going forward, these multimodal transport solutions being developed. And it will also take in air as well. So we'll see that air, land, sea becoming a lot more connected as we go forward. I think that's really being reflected by the port operators. Certainly DP World no longer really regards itself as a port operator. It's more of a transport or logistics solution provider, and its headspace is very much in that sort of solving customers' logistics problems, or providing logistics solutions, rather than just operating a port. So I think that's the way the market's going, and we'll see quite a lot of investment into infrastructure to tie air, land and sea together going forward. Let's move to the next slide. Finally, roads and bridges. There's a lot to talk about here. The challenge for this one, when it comes to just giving a summary, is it's a very fragmented market when you compare it to the larger assets that are delivered as ports, airports and railways. At the moment, the numbers are quite strong. 2025, similar to the other subsectors, is looking reasonably strong, but will probably undershoot 2024 and probably also undershoot 2023. But we have seen a strong number of contracts being awarded in roads over the last 18 months to 2 years, particularly in the major cities that are facing congestion problems. Dubai is certainly one of those, but also in Riyadh, where there's a number of large road projects being launched, with contractors being selected just to try and take some of that pressure off the road system and ease traffic. And it's a major priority for governments. I mean, the statistics vary, but there's a real GDP cost to people being stuck in traffic. So it's important from an economic growth point of view, but also important just from a sentiment point of view. I think it really impacts on quality of life for people that are living and working in cities. And I think that's become an increasingly important consideration for governments. If you look at what their objectives are with various economic visions, so whether it be Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia or Dubai's 2040 agenda, It's very much about creating cities that people enjoy living in, and traffic is something that people do not really enjoy. So a lot to talk about with roads, but it's really quite fragmented. Second poll question, would you like us to call you to understand how MEED can help support your business? So if you'd just like to respond to that question, and then I can start moving on to the Q&A. Okay, thank you very much for your responses. Looking at the questions so far, there's a question there about which of these are marine orientated. On the face of it, a very easy question to answer. However, there's some interesting dimensions to add to that. Obviously, seaports are marine orientated, and I've gone through the data for port projects. However, there are some other projects which do have marine components to them. If you think particularly in and around the Bahrain area, for them to connect up to the GCC rail does require the second causeway, which has been in the planning stage for quite a number of years. That has been talked about possibly being delivered as a PPP. And that causeway will do two things. It will, one, alleviate traffic on the existing causeway, but two, provide an alignment for a rail connection between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. So that's one marine project. Another causeway connecting to Bahrain is the Qatar-Bahrain causeway, which fell off the agenda in the mid-2010s. There has been some noise about that project in the last couple of years at the highest level. And the last I heard on that is that it's still waiting to have some sort of steering committee or technical committee put into place to choose consultants to start the project moving again. But again, that would be obviously a marine project which has road and rail on it. Other projects that have marine components, Bahrain has a new airport site which is being considered. It's a large offshore island which will be slightly off from the existing airport in the Maharak area. So that would be another marine project, obviously with the reclamation works, and there would be some form of causeway or bridge connecting it to the mainland. So yes, there's obviously the ports which are marine orientated projects, but there's quite a few others, also quite a few roads and bridges which will be crossing waterways. So one that's cropped up recently is the bridge crossing Obher Creek in Jeddah, for example, is another example of a marine-based project which is outside of the port space. So that's another example of just marine work. There's a question there for the WhatsApp slide to scan. While I'm talking, I'll try and flick back to put that slide on. There's a question there for looking for investment opportunities for 100 million to 5 billion working with FOs. My apologies, I'm not sure what FOs refer to, but in terms of investment opportunities, I think that's very much a question that's relevant in 2025. I think over the last couple of years, perhaps not that relevant a question. That's really changed with the budgetary pressures that we're seeing across the region in terms of delivering projects, and a lot of the answer to that question now is going as a PPP. And as we've seen, there's the PPP Qiddiya Express Rail, there's the PPP Abha Airport, there's also PPP highways which are being talked about. So there's a lot of investment opportunities in the PPP space. On top of that, if you look at some of the other opportunities in terms of investment, there's contractor finance opportunities as well. So there's quite a lot of there's a strong need for investment going forward across all sectors, not just transport. So a lot of opportunity there. I think the question is going to be how successfully those opportunities can be converted into actual real life investments. Question there on subsea tunnels. I think there might be a couple of smaller ones planned for various developments, but off the top of my head, I can think of a couple maybe that are talked about in Abu Dhabi. There's the Doha Bay crossing, which has had some elements of subsea tunnel in it, but mostly it's been bridges and causeways that have been talked about rather than tunnels. Question here: since most of the investments are going towards railway, what future does the maritime industry hold as Giga Island developments are also going on? Yeah, in terms of maritime, I think there's several layers to that question. The large-scale ports are reasonably well established and being expanded and further developed. So I think there's a lot of spending going on there. I just recently, in fact, yesterday, sat through a judging session for the MEED project awards, which are being held in November. And for the transport category, there were several large port projects which were nominated for awards there. So that just shows there's still a lot of major port projects that are going ahead. Interesting point that you raised there about the Giga Island developments. I think if I understand that correctly, there's the beyond sort of shipping and ports and sort of container ships and large cargo ships. There's a lot of smaller marine work which is being done for luxury island developments, coastal resorts, and that tends to be marinas rather than ports that are being developed. That market is something that's without question growing. We're seeing a lot of marinas being built, and a lot of yacht owners and private boat owners are based in the region now. And if you look at certainly some of the projects in Saudi Arabia, they're really targeting some of that luxury yacht traffic and luxury yacht destinations. So yes, I think there's quite a bit of work there on the maritime industry. That marina business is obviously a lot smaller ticket size than the major ports, but still quite a bit of focus on there. Other questions? One that I have a personal interest in: are there any bicycle lane projects? Yes, there are. I think Dubai in particular, but also in Abu Dhabi, there's been a lot of focus put on creating cycle lanes. These fall into several categories. One, there's the dedicated bicycle destinations, if you want to call it, which are cycle tracks that are maybe out in the desert or somewhere that are basically served just as a bicycle track for people to ride around. There's then cycle lanes which are connecting different parts of a city, which is more as a transport solution. And then on the third one, there are bicycle lanes and infrastructure being put into a lot of real estate development now. I think real estate developers, perhaps echoing the leadership of many of the countries of the region, are trying to make their developments the best places to live. And I think bicycle and non-car transport is a really important part of their sales proposition. So if I look at a lot of the big master plan development launches now, invariably they do include some reference to bicycle lanes. So there's a lot of interest there. Obviously, it's fairly simple infrastructure and not overly challenging from from a construction point of view. However, they're not always executed that well when it comes to planning and integration. So some of the clever stuff there for bicycle lanes is making them work from a planning point of view. Is there any recent discussions ongoing for a major sea bridge project in Bahrain other than the Qatar-Bahrain causeway? Yes, as I mentioned, there's the causeway connecting Bahrain with Saudi Arabia, which has been talked about for a number of years. And there's been consultants appointed, and yeah, at the moment, we're still waiting to hear an update on that project. But that second causeway connecting Bahrain and Saudi Arabia is a real project and something which has been talked about for a number of years now. Thank you for clearing that up. FO is family office. Yeah, family offices. I think the investment opportunities there, as I mentioned, PPP. I haven't seen too many family offices going into the PPP space, although I don't think that's a reason why they can't. I think possibly the area on the transportation spectrum that I would expect a family office to be more attracted to would be something that's more real estate aligned. So something like around a port, say a logistics zone, sort of an industrial area next to a transport area, that sort of thing. It would be more of a real estate asset than investing in the actual transport operation. That would be my expectation. I haven't seen family offices going into PPPs, but that might be possible. Heavy lift. Any chance to elaborate on heavy lift project cargo by sea? I'm not sure I 100% understand what that question means, but in terms of large project components being transferred by sea, yes, that's something which I think we're seeing increasingly as construction tends to become more of a manufacturing process than something that's cast in situ and delivered on site. I can think of quite a few things now where projects are being delivered and then being shipped to site. Obviously, offshore oil and gas facilities almost have to be transferred by sea. But I know quite a few projects now where there's components that are being shipped from other parts. Perhaps the best example is the silver orbs that have been delivered to form that hotel project on the Red Sea, at the Red Sea project that were fabricated in Sharjah. Do I think there will be a sharp upward trend in projects and values shortly after 25 and 2026? That's a really good question. There's two things to talk about there. There's two schools of thought in terms of where the market's sitting at the moment. One is that there is a decline in the amount of project awards just as budgets become more constrained, and that expectation is that that will continue into 2026. An alternative view is that the budgetary situation has changed. That's created a pause in contract awards in 2025. And as the market sort of pauses, recalibrates, and thinks about how to pursue things going forward, it will then sort of peak and reactivate things into 2026. If that is the case, then the expectation is that there will be an increase in contract awards in 2026 when compared to 2025. So the jury's out really in terms of which way the market's going to go. I think it's an interesting discussion point, and we will ultimately find out in 2026. A question there: city or client with the largest road projects in the coming few years, top 3 cities or clients. I would say, I don't have the data in front of me, but if you want me to make an educated guess, I would say RCRC in Riyadh. I would also say the Roads and Transport Authority in Dubai, and I'd probably go with Abu Dhabi next across a couple of different clients, but Abu Dhabi would be my next pick there in terms of road projects. What are my thoughts on the Riyadh and Jeddah connection? That's the rail, the land bridge rail scheme. I have a lot of thoughts on that one. The project has been talked about for a very, very long time, but almost as long as I've been at MEED, we've been talking about the Saudi land bridge. It has a lot of different challenges, which we covered on quite a few of the slides, but it's technically challenging, funding's challenging, and it's just difficult to get sign off. There's been various ways of proceeding with the project. There's been that Chinese PPP consortium in place. There's been comments from senior political leaders saying that it's about to move ahead, and it hasn't moved ahead. So it's a project that I feel should move ahead. I think it probably will move ahead, but the difficult question is when. It seems to be just about ready to start moving, and then doesn't seem to move ahead when you expect it to. So it's a difficult one to predict, that one. Is there any chance of some of the airport components will be developed under PPP? Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There are obviously the PPP airport projects, so the one at Medina and the one at Abha. I think the more interesting thing to look at there is particularly when we start looking at King Salman Airport, and probably more importantly, Dubai International Al Maktoum International Airport, there are components there that can be done as some sort of a PPP. So you could look at doing some of the, say, catering facilities or some of the other components that are in and around an airport, which lend themselves quite nicely to a PPP funding structure. So yes, I think there are opportunities to do the PPP itself at the airport level at the sort of the top table, but also use PPP for certain assets within the development. Just a follow up there on from the family offices, investment for marinas. Yeah, I think there's quite a few marina opportunities opening up, particularly on some of the major master plan developments, which have they're sort of high end luxury developments that are looking to attract the kind of people that own yachts and boats and would want marina facilities. There's a general question there on localization and a local office. The simple answer is yes, it is important to have a local office, particularly if you're actively participating in projects in country. In terms of countries to focus on for bridges, viaducts and tunnel projects of around $150 million, I think the easy answer there is Saudi Arabia. It's the largest market. There's a lot of development, and it's also the largest geography. And a lot of what we're talking about with transport is connecting things. And the larger the country is, that it stands to reason that the amount of transport infrastructure is greater. Question there, which wasn't covered on my slides. I was focusing on the GCC. There's a question there about Jordan. There's obviously talk about rail projects in Jordan. So there's quite a bit of talk there. The interesting questions, and this is where it gets really quite political in dimension, is there's a desire to connect the GCC rail up ultimately to Europe, which means you have to go through the Levant area and then up through Turkey as well. So there's some very interesting political discussions to have there about what happens with rail and how it connects up further north into Europe. Jordan is one of the options in terms of going further north. Iraq is another one. So there's some interesting developments going there, but obviously it's politically quite complex. There's a question there about projects being funded fully by sovereigns. There are projects that are fully funded by sovereigns. However, I would say that is a trend which is declining. There's a strong drive to get more private sector involvement across all levels, really. To reduce the funding burden, but also to bring in international expertise and best practice. In terms of timely making payments, the region doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to contract payments. It's something that I hear people complaining about all the time. One school of thought is that if you start going through different funding models, some of those payment and some of those client problems that you may have get removed as you may be becoming a contractor that's sitting on a PPP team. So there are perhaps some silver linings to things being funded differently than just directly by a sovereign entity. There's a few questions there which I'm afraid I don't have about setting up companies. I'm not an expert on that. And the others I think I've covered. Okay, I think that brings us to an end. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's been quite an interesting exercise reviewing the transport space in the region. I think just to summarize, there's an awful lot of opportunity there. I think the way that projects are going to be delivered in the future is going to be slightly different than what we've seen in the past. And then on top of that, in terms of the transport solutions that are delivered over the next few decades, will be in some ways more of the same, but also different, with a heavier focus on rail, which will create some challenges for the region, but also obviously a lot of opportunity, which is why we're all here and focused on the region. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your questions and making it an interactive discussion. So thank you very much.